Chapter 2, Part 3, Evaluating Subjectivism. The objectives for this video begin with us closely investigating subjectivism. Then we're going to consider two objections to subjectivism, learn that the concept of conscience does not require subjectivism, have the opportunity to develop our own replies to these objections, and finally, be able to decide for ourselves what we think of subjectivism. To begin evaluating subjectivism, I think that we can agree that people have different beliefs about moral issues. But could it really be wrong for me to lie or commit murder, but not wrong for you? To draw out one of the problems with subjectivism, I'm going to read a story about standing in line. This is on page 29 of our book. To appreciate the implications of subjectivism, imagine that you've been standing in line at the theater. Suddenly a strange man steps into the line right in front of you. How would you react? You'd certainly object, telling them that he has no right to cut in front of so many people, and that he should go to the end of the line. You might add that it's not fair for him to cut in line when no one else has. Note a few things about this very natural reaction. First, you're making a moral claim about fairness, rights, and what this man ought to do. In making these claims, you imply that the same obligations or rights hold for him no less than for everybody else standing in line. Moreover, you seem to assume that he, along with everyone else, already knows this. All of this is part of the intuition that the same moral principles hold for everyone. The man now makes an extraordinary reply. "I'm sorry," he says politely, "for I see that the fairness and rights you have just appealed to must hold for you. Perhaps they hold for other people here as well. You have my sincere sympathy, for I can imagine how inconvenient these principles of yours must be. I bet you've been standing here for some time, right? What you must understand, however, is that these principles don't happen to hold for me. Each of us is bound by our own set of moral principles, you know. You have a principle of fairness. Fortunately for me, I do not. Please don't misunderstand. I always do my best to live an upright and moral life, and if fairness were one of my principles, I wouldn't dream of cutting in front of you. However, it's not one of my principles, and so I am perfectly fine with cutting in front of you. As you probably didn't realize this when you started complaining, I assure you that I take no offense. I hope we've now cleared this up. But, by the way, can you step back a little bit? You're crowding me." So what this fairly obnoxious story is supposed to show is that if we accept subjectivism, it seems like we have to accept our line-cutting friend and his reasons for cutting in line in front of us. There's also a few further problems with subjectivism. One of these problems is that you'd never be able to assume that moral principles that hold for you would hold for anyone else. This seems to conflict with morality's primary function, which is to regulate how individuals relate to each other. So instead of giving us different versions of morality, what subjectivism actually ends up doing is leaving us with something like no morality at all. This is because, since we all have our own subjective morality, we can't count on anyone else to do what we expect them to do. Just like the example of us standing in line. We can't have the convention of a line if it's possible that at any point someone could just come cut in front of us, and this would be perfectly acceptable behavior. Let's talk about subjectivism and conscience. Our book introduces the concept of conscience without defining it. We can probably define conscience, however, as our personal inner guide to the rightness or wrongness of our behavior. This is sort of your inner voice, the thing telling you what you should or shouldn't do in a situation. Now, we may think that without subjectivism, there may be no room to have conscience. If my conscience tells me that it's wrong to drink alcohol, how can I account for the wrongness of my action in the case where I drink alcohol without subjectivism to say that it's wrong for me to drink alcohol in this situation? This problem can be dealt with by either relativism or objectivism by including a moral principle that's something like, when a person feels strongly that some kind of act is morally wrong, then that person commits a moral wrong by acting that way. Now, notice something about this particular moral principle. It doesn't say anything about the way that other people act. So, all it gives us is the ability to say that our actions were wrong if we think that they were wrong. It does not allow us to apply this to other people. Okay, let's review. By the end of this video, you should be able to define subjectivism and provide the benefits and consequences of this view. What are two objections? What's the concept of conscience, and how can we make sense of this concept without subjectivism? What are your replies to the objections presented against subjectivism? And what do you think about subjectivism? Does it survive the objections that were raised against it?